Hi, my name is Dr. Mehnaz Afridi. I'm here in New York. I'm from Manhattan College, Associate Professor of Holocaust and Islamic Study in the Religious Studies Department. I can't say how pleased I am that we are still having this commemoration of Srebrenica 25 years after. It's very important that the organizers, the Faculty of Political Science, the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial, and the Institute for Islamic Tradition of Bosniaks have organized this. I'm very honored, and I wish I was in Sarajevo with everybody because I really, really miss it this year, and I've been going for the last 4 years to commemorate and to remember the victims of the Bosnian genocide. Let me start with a quote by Alexander Hamon. "We in Sarajevo have nobody to talk, just each other. Nobody wants to listen to these stories. I cannot talk more. You talk now. I'm waiting for your letter." End quote. The next quote is by Helena Subotic. She writes, "Feeling and expressing accountability for all of this violent history makes our histories more balanced and complete, and our societies more just. Memory solidarity is politically difficult." End quote. If memory solidarity is politically difficult, how then do we heal? As victims give testimony, bodies are still found, and graves are dug, we are still witnessing the denial of the genocide. We have witnessed this denial slowly from 2004 to 2018 to the present. On the 25th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre, revisionist rhetoric about war crimes in Bosnia has spread exponentially. Witnessing and speaking out is what we can do with the 25th commemoration, the only mass killing in Balkan wars that was officially ruled as genocide by the international courts. This was an atrocity that was the final act in a much broader genocidal strategy. It was at first coined as an ethnic cleansing. The Srebrenica genocide was the planned and systematic industrialized conclusion of a 4-year campaign of forced deportation, torture, mass murder, and systematic sexual violence by Bosnian Serb forces in service of their goal to create a greater Serbia. Some Bosnian Serb historians and politicians continue to deny that genocide and ethnic cleansing took place. Here, both literally and figuratively, ethnic cleansing bleeds into genocide as mass murder is committed in order to rid the land of a people. This is clearly the case at Srebrenica. The denial of the Bosnian genocide has led to more suffering and political tension. The nationalism and racism that has crept up all over the world, including here in the United States, is in the words of denial and repression of all minorities. It is more than ever important that today we remember these victims. But today I also want to remember, as we must also try to think about healing and listening to the buried voices that were present as victims and absent as Bosnians during the siege. We must take account of the collective memory of not all Bosnians, but Muslims as well, as they experience their identities torn and their people murdered. As a Muslim living in the United States, I recall hearing about the Bosnian genocide from afar and from a close colleague, Aleš Debeljak, a renowned Slovenian poet. He was intense and sorrowful, but no one wanted to believe his accounts and wanted to take seriously the war that had ensued in his country. Essentially, no one cared, and he was frustrated and was cajoling people to the point where he was seen as being an angry man. Yet he was, as Elie Wiesel's book Night points out, like Moshe the Beadle, who warns the town of atrocities, and the Jews are in complete denial, like we were. Remembering is one thing, but we must accept and acknowledge the truth, and that's vital. But healing is a way forward in mending the fractures with others as we move into new nation building and maintaining relations with our neighbors if possible. After looking for ways of how we can remember, I thought of Bosnian narratives and literature that I have been immersed with that embody the rawness of experience that are then shelved into history books. but I wanted to bring them alive today. This body of literature brought me to loss, melancholia, nostalgia, and healing. There is something sad and melancholic, perhaps something that has been lost forever. What do we mourn for? When will we long for healing? Am I referring to the memorializing of something that has been lost forever? We sustain the grand memories of the chief Muslim civil and religious ruler, regarded as a successor of Muhammad, the Caliph who ruled in Baghdad until 1258, and then in Egypt until the Ottoman conquest of 1517. The title was then held by the Ottoman sultans until Bosnia-Herzegovina annexed to Austria-Hungary. A Bosnian Serb student, Gavrilo Princip, assassinates the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. This precipitates World War I, and Austria-Hungary collapses at the end of the war. Bosnia-Herzegovina becomes part of the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. I bring into play this short memory of Muslim Bosnian history to show the dramatic and rapid changes that led to the Bosnian genocide. The loss of the power of leadership, transformations of human psyche, and the development of a core religious identity is perhaps the core wound that we all face today. What do Bosnian Muslims say or scream at when their lives are lost, families destroyed, children killed, and men and women are murdered? Do they have a place of considerate catharsis? And how can we rehabilitate this deep wound from a place of powerful and happy memories all the way to loss? Bosnian literature and first accounts have battled and challenged the memories of trauma, a wound that cannot heal because of the cycle of violence and now denial. A few questions that I ask: if their stories are denied, doesn't that perpetuate another cycle of violence? Repression of the victim and the denial of their suffering is the most hateful act in human history. In Nowhere Man by Alexander Hamon, he describes the unsettling feeling of witnessing a war by being absent through his main character, Pronek. This is an important novel that includes voices that suffered outside of Bosnia, whether they were Bosnian or Muslims. Muslims watched the genocide from afar in shock and felt the collective pain of their brothers and sisters. Hamon writes, after a letter from Pronek's friend Mirza on grim stretcher duty in Bosnia in 1995, Pronek's tale unfolds almost through his own eyes, with an unnamed narrator as intimate as a reflection. Pronek says, oblivious to me as a wall is oblivious to a shadow dancing on it. Haunted by headlines of thousands killed in Srebrenica, Pronek piles on weight and has visions of a massacre triggered by the sound of just a staple gun next door. While he hates the standard question about whether he is Muslim, I am complicated, he explains. And he says, some Serbs tried to kill the Muslims in Sarajevo and Bosnia, and also the people who don't want to kill the Muslims. End quote. The novel brings up issue of home, identity, and time. Most importantly, the reader is caught in the depths of a victim who can be inside and outside of the war that is occurring in his own homeland. What is the wound that creates this from the perspective of the victim? And in Hamon's novel, it can be said that, as one author has argued, that the psychoanalytical rhetoric raised the element of madness and complexities of both Serbians and Croatians. The question remains, however, how can the Bosnians perpetuate their victimhood at the hands of the Serbs when they're also seeking to incorporate a substantial Serbian population and good relations? In Hamon's novel, we experience a complexity when he writes, quote, Serbs are mad people, but Croats suffer from a castration complex. Avowed Serb psychiatrist Dr. Jovan Raskovic to Franjo Tuđman, the president of Croatia, on the occasion of meeting in 1990 to resolve the growing tension between the Croatian government and the Serb minority in Croatia. He responded to what he saw as a need for psychiatric supervision in a political situation that was spiraling out of control. He ostensibly wanted to achieve a rapprochement between two ethnic groups, mad Serbs and complex Croatians. Here we see a complex web of recuperation, memory, and displacement of the truth of those who intentionally, perhaps, were killers. Maybe one should look at the slow but truthful moral response of Germany post-Holocaust, the acceptance of the Holocaust and the trauma and memory that goes with what Germans had to face. Facing the truth from within the perpetrators leads to the healing, as literature expresses that, even if you are absent in war, there is a collective feeling of responsibility. For example, Heman is a Bosnian author, but an onlooker during the war. He becomes a kind of delirium as he struggles with his identity and memories of both Sarajevo and his childhood. He has a section in his novel entitled Sarajevo, September 10, 1967, which is when he was born, and January 24, 1992, as he was marking a month before the siege that ensues for 4 years. He notes that his favorite place to hang out is Nostalgia, a marking that explains the nostalgia, but the memory of his home is marked with scenes like the following as abandonment and emptiness. When he flies out on January 22, 1992, quote, Pronek's father drops him off without entering the airport because there is no parking. Then he is on the plane buckling up, looking very warily at the mountains encircling the airport. The seat next to him is empty. The plane goes up, his stomach goes down, and he is careful not to show that he is afraid to die. He looks down and can see a line of dots trickling out of the airport building toward another plane. The plane penetrates the clouds, and Pronek can see nothing. By the time the plane exits the dark wool of clouds and enters a bright, starless sky, he already cannot remember what happened yesterday. End quote. The play on memory, forgetting, and then the repression of the war plagues the novel and his main character, once dropped off to be saved, yet he cannot imagine not being saved in the war. Men were murdered and women were murdered, but women were also raped. The lost and most neglected narratives during genocide are the ones of women who have been ravaged and raped by war, their bodies stymied by the enemy and used for war as a weapon. How do women heal? How do they tell their story? Rape, as we know, is a desire to feel powerful, to vent aggression, fear, and despair by crushing a physically weaker adversary to destroy and degrade an identity. In July 1995, after Bosnian Serb forces overran Srebrenica, 18-year-old HT was raped at a battery factory in nearby Potokadi. It was 40 days she had given birth and she was still bleeding. Her rapist knocked her unconscious before sexually assaulting her. She fled Srebrenica after managing to survive the Serb shelling. Her husband told her to go to the UN peacekeepers based in Potokadi. While he tried to escape through the woods to territory controlled by the Bosnian army with his brother, father, and father-in-law, later she found out that they were all killed. Feminist scholarship has two interrelated goals: to give women a voice long denied them, and to offer a perspective long denied us. The denial of their perspective lies in the very shame that female survivors of the Bosnian genocide, recalling the shame of the naked body paraded in front of men, the blood and the lack of hygiene, and the lack of dignity. These aspects are not to be spoken, and create not only what we know as trauma psychologically, but an inner shame that lies deep within us. The coming out as a woman who has been assaulted and abused and even raped during the genocide was not enough a trauma. Then the whole experience of the murder and mayhem of the whole community. In S, a novel about the Balkans based on real facts and interviews that Slavenka Drkulic conducted with Bosnian women after 1995, demonstrates the many issues that intersect women's lives regardless of race, status, and religion in the face of genocide. She writes a novel naming the main character S, who has an affair with the captain of the camp, a man she despises but gives up her body so that she is spared the continual rape by the Serbian soldiers. She sees him as a way to escape camp, but yet feels that, quote, the only thing I learned in the camp was about forgetting, end quote. The forgetting is a kind of remembering, as HT narrates that she remembers seeing bodies near the road to Potokadi, a child, a woman, a man hit by grenades. She saw an elderly woman whose chin had been cut off by a shell. I took a nappy from my baby to put her chin back since it was all ripped to pieces. Once she reached the battery factory, she saw people fainting because of the heat, because there was no drinking water. I saw a bucket near the road from humanitarian aid. I saw dry cookies, but they were green. I wiped the green stuff off the cookies and gave them to my son to eat. During the night, HJ recalls hearing the screams of women and children. In the morning, the children are crying again, and there is no water to drink. I went through the field to the stream, but I saw bodies of men, so I couldn't get water since I was too afraid. I returned to the factory, she recalled. I could no longer cope with the problem. It was a burden inside me, under my skin, in my core, in my bones. I felt I would burst and my brain wasn't functioning. I could no longer talk. I was suffocating. I was afraid and I couldn't breathe, so I had to talk to someone, she said. But she believes that she may never really recover. She says, it's a pain, a stain that will stay within me until I am dead. The pain and healing cannot be buried by genocide deniers and those who relativize genocide. This in itself creates a deep cycle of violence and a vacuum that we need to recognize. Denial of these stories call for a moral and collective conscience that can adhere to truth for the reality of pain, repression, and memory of these events. If we do not confront the deniers, it will be a catastrophe. There was a sense of catastrophe, physical and material. Germany was destroyed, partitioned, and then there was this moral catastrophe. German society had to face and recognize what had just happened. But this rather quickly subsided, and people had to deal with their daily lives. So this trauma and feeling of guilt was suppressed. What people see today as Germany's success is in coping with its past really started in the late 1950s and took hold in the 1960s. The catalytic event was the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials that took place from 1963 to 1965. These were the first major Nazi war crime cases pursued not by the victorious Allies, but by the Germans themselves. People who had served at the concentration camp were brought to justice. But even then, many Germans cast blame on the destroyed Third Reich, as if that somehow was separate from Germany. But we must learn from the lessons of the Holocaust and other genocides. So I ask, how are Muslims going to heal post-genocide? Do we want to share these memories? Can I ask one? So I ask, how are Muslims going to heal post-genocide? Do we want to share these memories with those who were present and absent? A sharing of loss and pain that is caught once again in the cycle of violence of memory. Whose memory and whose healing? Himan's novel is a recapturing of a lost past, a new future with a complex understanding of identity and loss. And HT recalls the horror so that she can move to a place of perhaps healing, even though she cannot forget the images, memories, and violence. These narratives call out for a kind of remembering that is intimate and real, which may offer a path to acceptance and healing. We must allow and work on if we want to turn the tables of violence. The denial of the pain of others is a denial of their humanity, and we are caught in a sad cycle of violence. And if we are not careful, we will see more violence and murder. I leave you with a short poem from my friend Aleš de Belgic, Without Anesthesia. He passed away in 2016 at the age of 54. Naked, alone, and heartless, I stand. There is no center of the world. My weeping cleanses nothing. My body isn't my property. Salt irritates the skin. Thank you.